The phone vibrated on the nightstand at 3:07 a.m. I groped for it in the dark, the screen's glare cutting into my eyes like a blade. An unfamiliar landline number. I answered, my voice still thick with sleep, and a clipped, professional woman's voice came through. Hello, is this the family of Nathan Shaw? This is City General Hospital's emergency department. I'm his wife. Your husband was brought in by ambulance. His condition is critical. We need a family member here as soon as possible. I sat up and clicked on the bedside lamp. What condition? What are you talking about? The woman on the line hesitated, a tiny pause, the kind people take before delivering news they know will detonate. Significant hemorrhage from the groin area. We're working to stop the bleeding. I'll explain more when you arrive. Groin. Hemorrhage. I stared at the hairline crack running down the bedroom wall, my mind a perfect blank for 3 full seconds. Nathan. Business trip. The next city over. Not due back until tomorrow. I threw off the covers and pulled on my clothes one-handed while opening the location tracking app on my phone. The little red dot representing Nathan's phone sat motionless atop a boutique hotel in the downtown district. The train station was a mile away. I locked the screen and walked into the nursery. My daughter lay curled on her side, mouth slightly open, one tiny fist clutching the edge of her blanket. I scooped her up, wrapped her in her fleece throw, and she nuzzled into my shoulder without waking, warm and weightless and completely trusting. I knocked on the neighbor's door. Mrs. Kowalski answered in her bathrobe, her graying hair loose around her shoulders. She took one look at my face and wordlessly held out her arms for the baby. I'm so sorry. Thank you. Just go. 20 minutes later, I burst through the emergency department doors. The corridor reeked of antiseptic. Fluorescent lights bleached every face to a sickly pallor. Behind the nurse's station sat a young woman who looked fresh out of nursing school, her ponytail slightly askew. I'm Nathan Shaw's family. You called me. She pulled up the computer system, eyes scanning the screen. Nathan Shaw. Emergency debridement. The admission deposit hasn't been paid. If you're family, we need you to settle that first. $5,000. Emergency debridement. What kind of injury requires that? The young nurse looked up, and I watched her carefully choose her next words. Has your husband had any recent surgery? In a private area. The wound seems to have torn open before it fully healed. The bleeding was quite severe. He needed immediate intervention. Private area. Surgery. Torn open. The words landed one by one, and I assembled them in my head into an answer so absurd I almost laughed. What private area surgery? I'm not sure of the specific procedure. She was visibly uncomfortable now. He gave us his own name. The paramedics brought him in. That's what the chart says. He told me he was on a business trip to the next city over. He absolutely would not be in a hospital here tonight. I kept my voice even, reasonable. What if someone stole his phone and is using his identity? You can't expect a family member to pay for a total stranger. The nurse blinked, turned, and called out, Patricia. The head nurse came over. She was a solid woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and the air of someone who had seen everything. She looked at me for 2 full seconds, said nothing, and pulled a transparent evidence bag from beneath the counter. His personal effects, she said, pushing it toward me. Take a look. Car keys. A wallet. 2 phones. The car keys were to the Honda. I recognized the worn leather fob. The wallet contained Nathan's driver's license, That face I'd woken up next to for 5 years, the face I'd have recognized blind. But 2 phones. One was his everyday device, a hairline crack spiderwebbing across the top left corner from when he dropped it drunk last winter. I'd offered to get it repaired, he'd said not to bother. The other was silver. Sleek. New. No scratches, no case, no signs of wear. I had never seen it before in my life. I pointed through the plastic at the silver phone. If the man in there really is Nathan, he should be able to unlock this with his fingerprint. I don't have that much cash on me. All our money is in his accounts. I'd need his phone to transfer funds. The head nurse studied me. Then she picked up the evidence bag and walked down the corridor. Less than 2 minutes later, she returned. It unlocked. It's him. All right, I said. I'll go pay. I took the silver phone and walked to a row of plastic chairs tucked into a corner alcove near the vending machines. At the far end of the hall, the surgery light glowed red. A window was cracked open somewhere, and the night wind crept in, cold against the back of my neck. I took a breath. Opened the phone. A messaging app. A pinned conversation at the very top. Over a dozen unread notifications. The contact name, Naughty Kitten 92. My finger touched the screen, and the chat history spilled open like a wound. Asterisk good morning, baby. Did you sleep well? Asterisk. Asterisk good night, gorgeous. Can't stop thinking about you, asterisk. I scrolled. Photos from a resort in Cancun, the infinity pool, the ocean view, a 9-photo grid of artfully plated dinners by candlelight. Then, further down, the private photos. Her in a slinky sundress, posing in a mirror. Him behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, his fingers splayed possessively across her stomach. One photo was taken in a steamy bathroom mirror, the glass fogged, both of them unmistakably naked. I kept scrolling. The money trail unspooled in a cascade of transaction notifications. $52. $131.40. $88. Notes attached, asterisk for my baby's new dress. For my baby's new bag. For my baby, just because, asterisk. On the 9th of last month, the day our daughter spiked a fever of 103 and I'd spent 4 hours in the children's hospital waiting room holding her burning body against my chest, on that exact day, Nathan had sent this woman $300. That same evening, when I'd called him, panicked and exhausted, he'd told me money was tight. He'd wired me $50 and told me to make it stretch. The silver phone trembled in my hands. A nurse pushed a cart down the hallway, its wheels screeching against the linoleum. The surgery doors swung open and shut. Someone strode out, gloves smeared dark red. I closed my eyes. Counted to 3. Opened them. Then I pulled out my own phone, held it up to the silver screen, and recorded every message, every photo, every transfer. Methodically. Completely. The shutter of my camera clicked like a metronome. When I was done, I stood up and walked back to the nurse's station. I placed the silver phone and the admission form on the counter together. My voice came out calm, calmer than I felt, calmer than I had any right to be. I'm sorry. I don't know his payment password. I can't transfer the money. You might want to contact his parents instead. The young nurse stared at me. What? Also, I said, the person who brought him to the hospital, where did she go? I think she should be the one handling this. Every nurse at the station turned to look at me. I knew what they were expecting. Tears. Hysteria. A woman clutching a phone and demanding to see a doctor, pleading for her husband's life. I gave them none of it. I shoved my hands into my coat pockets, exhaled a long, ragged breath, and walked toward the elevator. Behind me, whispered voices rose and fell, but they were quickly swallowed by the eternal, indifferent clamor of the ER. Outside, the pre-dawn air hit my face like cold water. I stood on the steps and looked up at the red emergency light pulsing atop the building, steady as a heartbeat, tired as an insomniac's eye. I pulled out my phone and called Sophie. 5 rings. A groggy mumble. Elena. What time is it? Sophie, I said. That link you sent me. You were right. It's him. Silence. Then the rustle of her sitting up, the fog clearing from her voice. Where are you? The hospital. Are you sick? What's wrong? Not me. I kept my eyes on the red light. It's Nathan. He had some kind of genital surgery. The wound hadn't healed, and he slept with someone. It tore open. Massive hemorrhage. He's in the ICU. A longer silence. Holy shit, Sophie said. A little over a month earlier, Sophie had sent me the link while I was wrestling a bottle into our daughter's mouth. Elena, look at this. Is this Nathan? The photo showed a man crouched on a beach, tying a woman's sandal strap. He was turned mostly away from the camera, only half his face visible, but I recognized the tiny dark mole by his left ear instantly. 5 years together. I'd have known him from a blurry shadow. And I recognized the woman, too. She'd been at his company's holiday party, wearing a skirt so short it might as well have been a belt, working the room like she was taking bids. Nathan's gaze had tracked her all night, never once landing back on me. My hands shook as I scrolled. The photos that followed hit me like successive blows to the chest. The infinity pool. The king-sized hotel bed. The bathroom counter, and sitting on it, unmistakable, the razor and toothbrush I'd given him for our anniversary. I stared at the screen. In my arms, our daughter grabbed at my collar and babbled, oblivious. I lifted my phone to call him. To scream. To demand. Before my finger could hit dial, the phone rang. Sophie. Don't call him, she said, breathless. Not yet. Why the hell not? If you confront him now, all he'll do is hide his phone deeper and delete everything. And then what? You've got a baby, no job, no income. If this blows up, who do you think is going to be left standing? I gripped the phone, my breath ragged. So I just swallow this. No. Swallowing it will kill you. Sophie's voice hardened, shifting into the mode of someone who made her living dissecting human dysfunction. What we do is make sure he's the one who dies from it. Not you. I looked down at our daughter. She gazed up at me with round, unblinking eyes, sensing something had shifted in the room but too young to name it. Stabilize him. Gather evidence, Sophie continued. Does the other woman have a real job? She works at his company. Perfect. Then we go after her first. 3 days later, Nathan came home from his trip. He walked through the door, didn't bother taking off his shoes, and collapsed onto the sofa, scrolling through his phone. The baby whimpered in her crib. He didn't look up. Honey, I said, walking over with our daughter balanced on my hip, we're almost out of formula. Can you pick some up? The brand she's been on, it's about $40 a can. His thumb kept moving across the screen. He didn't lift his head. Didn't I just buy some last month? How do you go through it so fast? You two need to learn to budget. I'm working myself to death out there. Money doesn't grow on trees. Maybe I could use the money from my dowry to cover it. Yeah, do that. He rolled onto his side, turning his back to both of us. Things are tight right now. Business travel expenses add up. We'll figure it out later. I stood there, biting down on the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted metal. Our daughter had a fever last month. He'd said money was tight. The formula ran out, money was tight. But one night at that Cancun resort would have covered 3 months of everything our baby needed. At 2 in the morning, the steady rhythm of his breathing told me he was deep asleep. I slipped out of bed, picked up his phone from the nightstand, and pressed his thumb to the sensor. His messaging app was spotless. Call history wiped. Photo gallery empty, even the recently deleted folder cleaned out. No transaction records, no red envelope history, no shopping receipts. Not a single trace. I'd expected that. I didn't bother searching any of those surface-level places. Instead, I opened his airline app, the one tied to his real identity, the one that couldn't be scrubbed. Under travel records, the passenger list showed 2 names, Nathan Shaw, and beneath it, Vanessa Lynn. Full ID number displayed. Home address on file. I closed the phone, slipped it back under his pillow, and returned to bed. He shifted in his sleep and mumbled something I couldn't make out. A name, maybe. Or just a dream. A few days later, while Nathan was away on a legitimate business trip, I called Vanessa Lynn. Ms. Lynn, this is Elena Shaw. Nathan's wife. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. The coffee shop across from your office. Let's talk. Silence on the other end. Then, a carefully composed voice. I'm sorry, I don't think I understand what this is about. You don't need to understand. I have things to show you. The next afternoon, I sat at a table by the window and watched her walk in. She wore a cream-colored cashmere cardigan, her hair loose and soft around her shoulders, her makeup minimal and deliberately innocent. Looking at her, you'd never guess. That was the point. She slid into the seat across from me, her smile practiced and pleasant. Mrs. Shaw, I think there's been some misunderstanding. Nathan and I are just colleagues. Nothing more. You really shouldn't let your imagination run away with you. I said nothing. I pushed my phone across the table. The screen showed a screenshot of Nathan's airline travel records. The Cancun trip. 2 passengers. Both names. Her smile flickered but held. A company retreat. Should I call your HR department and ask them to confirm that? Whether the Cancun trip last December was a company retreat that included you on the roster. The color drained from her face. Relax, Ms. Lynn. I'm not here to fight. I lifted my coffee, took a sip, and set it down with a quiet, deliberate clink. The money Nathan spent on you, I could let that go. The transfers, the gifts, all of it. I could choose not to pursue it. Her eyes flickered with a brief, unguarded flash of relief. One condition. Starting today, you cut off all contact with him. Block him on every platform. Delete his number. Disappear from his life completely. If I ever find out you two are still in touch. I paused, letting the silence do the work. I will compile every photo, every chat log, every hotel booking, and mail it to your hometown. I have your family's address from your ID records. I don't need to know the exact house. All I have to do is show up at the village office and start asking questions. How long do you think it takes for news like that to spread? a day. 2. Your parents still live there. Your father, how's his blood pressure? Can he handle finding out his daughter is the other woman? Her jaw tightened. Her hands, resting on the table, curled into fists. Also, this conversation never happened. If you tell Nathan I spoke to you, I will sue you immediately. Under state law, every cent he gave you was marital property. I can claw back every last dollar. A court summons delivered to your parents' doorstep. Go ahead, test me. I didn't wait for her answer. I stood, placed a bill under my coffee cup, and looked down at her one last time. You're young. You're pretty. Go find a man who isn't already broken. Don't waste yourself fighting over half of a rotting man. I walked out. The early spring wind cut through my coat, and I shivered, but my hands were steady. That same evening, Vanessa sent Nathan her breakup text. Clean, efficient, no drama. She was smart, she'd done the math. The money he'd given her wasn't worth a lawsuit and a ruined reputation. I underestimated her, though. And I overestimated Nathan. The night Vanessa broke up with him, Nathan came undone. He sat on the couch, staring at his phone, scrolling up and down her chat history like he could will the deleted messages back into existence. The dialog box that had once been full of sweet nothings now showed only a cold gray system notice. This user has enabled friend verification. He stood up, circled the living room twice, dropped his phone, bent down to pick it up, fumbled it, tried again. His hands were shaking. Then he grabbed his coat and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. I watched through the peephole as his silhouette disappeared down the hallway. Then I walked to the window. 3 minutes later, his Camry's taillights flared red in the darkness, and he roared out of the parking lot. He came home at 5 in the morning. I found out later, from his rideshare receipts, that he'd spent the entire night camped outside Vanessa's apartment building. Vanessa hadn't come home that night at all. She'd checked into a hotel with another male colleague. Some people spend years grinding through school only to learn nothing but how to climb into other people's beds. But none of that was my problem anymore. From that day forward, I had only one job: lock the door, and deal with the dog. For the next several days, Nathan lay in bed like a fish tossed onto dry land. He took sick leave. His phone never left his hand. Every notification ping made him jolt upright, eyes wild and hopeful, and every time, it was food delivery spam or a robocall. The look in his eyes was something I'd never seen before. Hollow. Gutted. Like something vital had been scooped out of him. So this was heartbreak. 5 years of marriage, and I was witnessing it for the first time. Fascinating. On the 4th day, he dragged himself out of bed. Unshaven. Hair a mess. He spent the whole day hunched on the sofa in a rumpled jacket. When the baby cried, he lurched to his feet and screamed at us. She burrowed into my chest, her tiny body trembling. I stroked her back and looked at the man on the sofa. Men like this, devoted puppies to strangers, rabid wolves at home. I remembered something Sophie had once said, getting a woman to be interested in him again isn't hard. But making him believe he still has what it takes, that's the match that lights the fire. I bent down and kissed our daughter's forehead. The next morning, while Nathan was still asleep, I slipped a glossy advertisement flyer into the pocket of his favorite jacket. The headline read, in bold gold letters, "Restore your confidence. Reclaim your virility." Below it, a silhouette of a man with exaggerated musculature, a woman draped contentedly over him. Smaller text promised discretion, results, and a future where she'll never look elsewhere again. Honestly, I didn't really need the flyer. He would have found his way there eventually. Men don't talk about it, but they think about it constantly. Every sideways glance in the locker room. Every joke they laugh at a little too hard. Vanessa left him for another man, and Nathan had replayed it 100 times in his head, and every time, he would have arrived at the same damning conclusion: he wasn't enough. When he finally got up, I was in the kitchen. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched him slip on his jacket and head for the door. His hand went into the pocket. His whole body paused. He pulled out the flyer and stared at it for a long time. His Adam's apple bobbed. He changed into a clean shirt, ran a comb through his hair, and left. On my phone, the location tracker showed his little red dot creeping along the main boulevard. It stopped at the address of the clinic advertised on the flyer, the most reputable one in the city, the most expensive, with the longest waiting list. 15 minutes later, the dot was moving again. I made a call. Why did he leave? He said he needed to think about it. Wanted to compare other options. A slow smile spread across my face. Good. I'd done my research. There weren't many clinics in this city that performed that particular procedure. The one on the flyer was the best, and the most selective. I'd counted on him walking out of there. And I'd counted on him finding his way to one of the others. The next day, he woke early. Shaved. Put on a freshly pressed shirt. Before he left, he even said, "Don't wait up for dinner." He didn't tell me where he was going. He didn't need to. All day, that little red dot on my phone sat motionless on the address of a private clinic on the east side of town. It didn't move until evening, when it crept back toward our neighborhood. When he came through the door, his gait was slow and careful, his legs held slightly apart, like he was afraid of brushing against something. He went straight to the guest bedroom and locked the door behind him. He didn't eat dinner. In the middle of the night, I got up for a glass of water. Passing the guest room, I heard the sounds of restless tossing, muffled groans. He'd really put himself through hell for this. All to win back a woman who'd already moved on. I am a poisonous woman. I'm the only one who knows it. Everyone else thinks I'm a doormat, no skills, no spine, a wife who couldn't even make a scene when her husband strayed. They're half right. Starting the next day, I doubled the chili and salt in every meal. The braised pork got an extra spoonful of fermented bean paste. The stir-fried greens left the wok with a glistening coat of dried chili flakes. Nathan took 2 bites, threw down his chopsticks, muttered a curse, and went back to his room to order delivery. The oral antibiotics in the medicine cabinet. I replaced every capsule with vitamin C tablets. The tube of postoperative ointment on his nightstand. I swapped it for petroleum jelly. I didn't hurt him. I just didn't help. Post-surgery recovery requires avoiding spicy food, abstaining from sex, and strictly following the medication schedule. The doctor would have drilled these instructions into him. I just made sure that every path back to health was quietly blocked. Just a little. That was all. On the security camera feed, I watched him make a phone call from the guest room. His voice was low, hushed, but the tone was unmistakable, the eager panting of a dog hoping for scraps. "Vanessa, I've been abroad the past few days. Yeah, I'm coming back soon. I got you a present, remember that bag you wanted? The Chanel. I had someone track it down." Whatever she said on the other end, he sat on the edge of the bed, practically wagging his tail. I stared at the monitor, narrowing my eyes. So they were back on. Vanessa hadn't taken my warning seriously. She probably thought a stay-at-home mother with a baby on her hip couldn't possibly follow through on a threat. She'd learn. In the bathroom, I stood before the mirror and unbuttoned my pajama top. The reflection showed a belly mapped with stretch marks, skin loose at the sides, a C-section scar still fading from angry red to dull pink, a pale centipede crawling across my pelvis. And the man who had left those marks on my body was lying in the next room, dreaming his pathetic little dreams. I buttoned my shirt back up. One button at a time. Slow. Deliberate. The bag arrived soon after. Chanel, black lambskin with gold hardware. The receipt from the reseller showed $2,300. That was enough to cover half a year of formula. One evening, Nathan announced he was taking a short business trip, just overnight in the next city. Before he left, he changed into a brand new shirt. Spritzed on cologne. Even turned to me and asked, "How do I look?" I looked up from the dinner table. New shirt. Cologne. Clean-shaven jaw. And in his eyes, a bright, brittle confidence. "Very handsome," I said. He believed me. He walked out with a spring in his step. The door clicked shut. I sat at the table and opened the location tracker. The red dot traveled steadily south, then stopped. A boutique hotel. I checked the time. 9 in the evening. I put our daughter to bed. Tucked her blanket snug around her shoulders. Kissed her forehead. She murmured something in her sleep, small fingers twitching, then stilled. Then I sat on the living room sofa, lights off, watching the unmoving red dot in the darkness. At 11:43 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello, is this the family of Nathan Shaw? Your husband has been brought to City General by ambulance. We need you here as soon as possible to sign surgical consent forms." I leaned back into the sofa cushions. My voice was calm. "What's his condition?" "Severe hemorrhage from the groin. We're doing everything we can. It's critical. I'll be right there." I hung up. Stood. Walked to the entryway and put on my shoes. My fingers didn't shake as I tied the laces. Before I walked out, I glanced back at the dark living room. The family photo on the TV console was swallowed by shadow, 3 silhouettes barely visible. "Goodbye, Nathan," I said quietly. And I pulled the door shut behind me. 3 days after the surgery, Nathan was moved from the ICU to a regular ward. I was at a law firm when the hospital called, sitting across from Mr. Harrison, a divorce attorney Sophie had recommended. We were going through my asset spreadsheet line by line. "Mrs. Shaw, your husband has been transferred out of intensive care. Please come to the hospital as soon as possible to complete the paperwork. Also, the inpatient fees are 3 days overdue. I've already notified his parents. Please contact them. Their phones aren't connecting." I hung up. Mr. Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Your husband. Hospitals chasing payment." I set the phone down and returned to the documents spread across the conference table. Where were we? The premarital property, Nathan's house, purchased before the marriage but with mortgage payments made from joint funds during the marriage. That's divisible, correct? Yes. The portion of mortgage payments made during the marriage, plus the corresponding appreciation, are considered marital property. Mr. Harrison made a note on his legal pad. "Based on what you've told me, the house was purchased with a down payment before the marriage, but the 5 years of mortgage payments came from shared income. Current market value minus the purchase price, the appreciation alone is roughly $170,000. Your share would be in the range of $85,000. And the car. The Camry in his name. Purchased during the marriage. Marital property. Either sell and split the proceeds, or one party buys the other out. He flipped through the documents I'd provided. Now, regarding the infidelity evidence, the chat logs, bank transfers, hotel receipts, these are conclusive. Under the circumstances, Mr. Shaw's adultery constitutes significant marital misconduct. A claim for spousal support and an unequal division of assets in your favor is entirely viable. He paused. If you can demonstrate that the funds he diverted to the other woman were substantial and constituted dissipation of marital assets, the court may order him to reimburse the marital estate, or award you a greater share. I can demonstrate it. I opened my photo gallery. Screenshot after screenshot, meticulously organized. Every transaction from the silver phone. The notes, asterisk for my baby's new dress. For my baby's new bag. For my baby, just because, asterisk, the amounts I can trace total over $80,000. Mr. Harrison examined the images, his expression shifting through shades of professional admiration. Your evidence collection is thorough. What's the next step? Try negotiating a settlement first. If he won't agree to reasonable terms, we file. I'll draft a proposed settlement agreement. You take it home, review it, and we'll discuss. I gathered the papers into my bag and stood. Outside the office tower, my phone rang. My mother-in-law. I barely had the phone to my ear before her voice sliced through. Elena. Have you no decency? Your husband is lying in a hospital bed, and you can't even show your face. You won't answer calls. What kind of woman are you? I held the phone away from my ear and let her finish. Margaret, I said, when she'd run out of steam, in the past 3 days I've taken nearly 40 phone calls. All from creditors. Hospital bills, credit card debt, car payments. I pulled Nathan's bank statements. Last month, he transferred a total of $3,000 to our joint household account. Do you know what he earns? $15,000 a month. Where do you think the other $12,000 went? Would you like to go to the hospital and check his silver phone? That's nonsense. My Nathan is the most responsible. Then go look for yourself. Or pull up his bank records. Ask him about the $80,000 he spent on his mistress while I was at home, holding your granddaughter, calling friends to borrow money for her fever medication. There was a choked silence on the other end. Then, a pivot. Well, he's hospitalized now, and you're his wife. You have a duty to care for him. His father's at a conference, my back is acting up, who else is going to do it? The woman who called the ambulance for him can do it. Or Vanessa Lynn, she's the one he took to Cancun last year. You can give her a call. They both owe your son something. I don't. Margaret's voice began to tremble. You ungrateful little, after everything our family has done for you. You live in the house we bought. You drive the car we. Margaret, I cut her off. The down payment on that house was $28,000 from your side. My dowry was $26,000, plus another $7,000 my parents added. All of it went into that down payment. The renovation. My parents paid. The appliances and furniture. My family. The car was purchased after the marriage, and the loan was paid from joint income. If you want to audit the last 5 years, I'm ready. Let's go line by line and see who owes whom. The line went dead silent. I hung up and drove home. Sophie was there with the baby. She was pacing the living room, humming tunelessly, my daughter giggling in her arms. Well? Sophie's eyes lit up when she saw me. What did the lawyer say? The evidence is strong. I can claim marital waste and marital misconduct. Try to settle first. If he won't agree, we go to court. I hung up my bag and took the baby. And what do you actually want? I sat on the sofa and was quiet for a moment. I want him to walk away with nothing, I said. The words came out soft and hard at the same time. Is that realistic? Legally, probably not. You can't make someone entirely destitute in a divorce. There are limits. I bounced our daughter gently on my knee. But I'm going to take back every dollar that belongs to me. And every dollar he spent on other women, I'm going after that, too. Sophie nodded and was silent for a beat. Then, what about Vanessa? You're not actually letting her off, are you? I looked up. You warned her. She went right back to him. So your warning meant nothing. It wasn't Vanessa who put him in the hospital. I explained what I'd pieced together from the nurses, the unknown woman at the hotel, the 911 call. Sophie's face contorted through a dozen reactions before landing on something between disbelief and disgust. Nathan is actually a feral animal. Pretty much. The baby yawned, her little head lolling against my chest. I laid her down in her crib, pulled her blanket up. She rolled onto her side, one hand clutching the fleece, and was instantly asleep. Vanessa, Sophie said, you're not just letting her skate, right? I sat back on the sofa and picked up my mug. The tea was cold. Absolutely not. Vanessa received my letter 2 days after Nathan was discharged. I sent it via certified mail to her parents' home address, the one on her ID record. The envelope was addressed to her father. The letter itself was not long. But every line was backed by documentation. Cancun hotel reservations with both their names. Airline records showing joint travel. Bank transfers with dates and amounts. Screenshots of internal company correspondence confirming that their business trips were nothing of the sort. The final paragraph read, pursuant to the state marital property laws, all funds transferred by Nathan Shaw to you during the course of our marriage were joint marital assets, wrongfully diverted. You are hereby notified that unless the full amount of those transfers is returned within 7 business days, this letter, along with all supporting evidence, will be forwarded to your employer's Human Resources Department, your employer's Ethics Committee, and the administrative office of your hometown. Signed, Elena Shaw. With my personal seal beneath the signature. The day the letter arrived, Vanessa called me 17 times. I didn't pick up once. By evening, the text messages started. First, righteous indignation. The Cancun trip was a team-building retreat. The transfers were ordinary gifts between colleagues. She had done nothing wrong, she was being framed, how dare I? I didn't reply. The messages shifted. She was willing to offer compensation. How much did I want? Name a number. I still didn't reply. On the 6th evening, Sophie sent me a link. Vanessa posted on social media that she's being cyberbullied and has depression. I'm dying. I clicked. It was a lengthy post, 2,000 words of self-pity and victimhood. She'd been viciously threatened by a jealous wife. She had never interfered in anyone's marriage. She was being slandered with baseless accusations. At the bottom, a photo of her wrist wrapped in gauze. The comments were split. Half were sympathetic, hugs, sweetie, the wife sounds unhinged. Half were brutal, you knew he was married, you don't get to play victim. I closed the tab. On the 7th day, Nathan called me. It was the first time we'd spoken since he came out of the ICU. Elena. His voice was thin, reedy, still drained from the hospital. Vanessa says she got a letter. From you. Yes. How could you do that? His pitch rose, but he couldn't sustain it. She and I were over a long time ago. Why are you digging up the past? Do you know her coworkers found out? She's going to lose her job. That's not my problem. He took a ragged breath. That's an invasion of privacy. It's illegal. Then tell Vanessa to sue me. I was at the kitchen table, spooning rice cereal into our daughter's mouth. I'd be curious to see if the court protects a mistress's privacy rights. A muffled crash on the other end, something thrown, or a fist hitting a mattress. Elena. What do you want? I put down the spoon and wiped our daughter's chin. A divorce. House goes to me. Our daughter goes to me. Savings split down the middle. You keep the car, I won't fight you on it. The money you spent on Vanessa and whoever else, I'll let that go. But you sign over full custody and pay monthly child support. You're out of your mind. Then we'll see each other in court. I picked up the spoon again. I have your silver phone. The messages, the transfers, the photos, the videos. How do you think a judge will react to those? Nathan went silent. All I could hear was his breathing, fast, ragged, uneven. I could picture him perfectly. Face flushed dark red. Vein pulsing at his temple. Wanting to explode but knowing, with absolute certainty, that he had nothing left to threaten me with. Elena, please. The tone shifted, softening into something that was meant to sound like remorse. I know I messed up. I know. Just give me one more chance. For our daughter's sake. She needs a father. She has a father. He just doesn't want her. I lifted the baby and settled her against my shoulder. When you were in Cancun with Vanessa, swimming in the infinity pool, did you think about your daughter? When you were in a hotel room with another woman, did you think about your daughter? When you earned $15,000 a month and transferred $30,000 to your mistress while we ran out of formula, did you think about your daughter? No response. Nathan, for years I covered for you. I propped up your image. The night you got promoted, you took your colleagues out to celebrate, and I was 7 months pregnant, standing all night ordering your food and pouring your drinks so you could take the credit. Your mother's birthday, the one you completely forgot. I ordered the cake. I bought the gift. I made up the excuse about your overtime. And how did you repay me? My voice was steady. It was so steady it felt like it belonged to someone else. But something hot and burning was gathering behind my eyes. You told people I was bad with money. That I was lucky you took care of me. In 5 years of marriage, I never bought myself a single piece of clothing that cost more than $20. I never spent a cent of your money on myself. After our daughter was born, your mother said taking care of me during recovery was too much work. She packed up half the food in our kitchen and left. I was alone. Newborn. Diapers. Stitches. And you were out there, with other women, while my C-section scar was still raw. A long, hollow silence. Elena. His voice shook. I couldn't tell what it was, regret, shame, or just fear. I didn't care anymore. The divorce agreement is in your email. My lawyer drafted it. You have 3 days to sign. If you do, we end this cleanly. If you don't, I file with the court next week. I hung up. I lowered my face into the soft curve of my daughter's neck, breathing in the warm, milky scent of her skin. She reached up and touched my face, her round eyes puzzled. "It's okay," I whispered, wiping my cheeks. "Mommy's okay." That letter was never about the money. It was about the mask. Women like Vanessa live for how they're seen. She spent 3 hours a day on her makeup and 2 hours editing every photo. She existed inside a gallery of carefully curated images, each caption workshopped, each filter tested. The greatest terror she could imagine was someone ripping the mask off in public. So I ripped it off. 3 days later, Vanessa blocked me on all platforms. Her social media went locked. Her profile photo, a bikini selfie from that Cancun infinity pool, was replaced with a solid black square. Her company's HR issued her a formal warning. They didn't fire her. There's no law explicitly prohibiting employees from being the other woman, but her reputation was ash. At the next corporate event, women whispered in clusters and men looked at her differently. Her year-end performance review came back marked, "Needs improvement." Sophie told me all of this later. Her company had vendors in common with Vanessa's. She had her sources. You know what the best part is? Sophie was laughing so hard she could barely breathe. They transferred her from business development to the supply room. She spends her days organizing boxes of printer paper and obsolete office chairs. She tried to quit, but her contract has a training reimbursement clause. If she leaves early, she owes them tens of thousands. I listened to all of this without any particular feeling. It was like hearing gossip about a distant cousin I'd never much liked. That was only the first step. The day Nathan was discharged, I went to the hospital to pick him up. Not out of kindness. Mr. Harrison had advised it, catch him while he was physically weak and psychologically shattered. Get the papers signed. Nathan didn't expect me. When he saw me in the doorway of his room, something flickered in his eyes, a flash of hope, maybe, or just surprise. His mouth opened and closed. In the end, he just stared. I walked in and began gathering his things. Phone. Charger. Wallet. Hospital card. The sheet of postoperative care instructions. He sat propped against the pillows, still in his hospital gown. He looked shrunken. "Let's go," I said. He rose slowly, moving like his body still remembered the pain. He'd lost weight, his collarbones jutted sharply, his cheekbones more pronounced than I'd ever seen them. He walked with his legs slightly apart, his posture awkward, careful. "Mom said she couldn't make it today," he said. His voice was hoarse. "I know. That's why I'm here." I pushed the wheelchair. The nurse had said he could walk, but recommended the chair to avoid stressing the wound. He hesitated, then lowered himself into it. The elevator was empty except for us. The silence was so complete I could hear him breathing. "Elena, about that night." He stared down at his hands in his lap. "It was a mistake. That woman, she was just..." "Just what?" "Just fun." He looked up, meeting my eyes in the polished metal of the elevator doors. "You know how it is. Women on the side, it doesn't mean anything. You and the baby, you're what matters." I said. The elevator opened. I wheeled him through the lobby toward the parking garage. Passing the nurse's station, the young nurse who'd handled my admission caught my eye. She grinned and gave me a quick thumbs up. I smiled back. At the car, I helped him into the passenger seat and walked around to the driver's side. I started the engine, and cold air poured from the vents. He hadn't put on his seatbelt. I glanced at him. Buckle up. He fumbled the belt into place. Elena, does it really have to come to this? He turned toward me, his eyes pleading. We've been together so many years. Our daughter is so little. I'll do anything you want. Just forgive me this once. For her sake. I lived for her for 3 years. I kept my eyes on the road ahead. From the moment she was in my belly, I was living for her. When I was pregnant, your mother said it better be a boy, and if it was a girl, I'd have to try again. You nodded along. The day I went into labor, you were on a business trip. I took a cab to the hospital alone. During my recovery, your mother decided caring for me was too much trouble. She stayed a week, took half our food, and left. I was by myself with a newborn and a body full of stitches. I pulled out of the parking garage and merged into traffic. Our daughter's first fever, she was 3 months old. I held her in the emergency room for 4 hours alone. You said you had a work dinner. You came home at 2 in the morning, drunk. Her first word was, Dada. You were too busy sending Vanessa red envelopes to even answer the video call. Nathan, you're asking me to think of our daughter. When have you ever once thought of her? We stopped at a red light. I turned and looked directly into his eyes. You said your affairs meant nothing. That home was what mattered. So let me ask you, last winter, when our daughter was burning up and you told me to cover the medical bills myself because you were short on cash, how much did you transfer to Vanessa that same week? Last month, when you told me you were traveling for work, and I later found out you were in a hotel room with someone else, did you think of us at all? The light turned green. I pressed the accelerator. I wanted to forgive you. For her sake. But if I forgive you, how do I face the woman who carried a baby with a 104-degree fever through a hospital at 3 in the morning, alone? I drove him to his parents' building. I did not take him to the apartment was now mine and our daughter's. He didn't belong there anymore. I parked and helped him with his things. The agreement is in your email, I said, handing him his phone. 3 days to consider. If you sign, we're done. If not, I file Monday. He took the phone and stood at the entrance, watching me. Sunlight fell directly on his face. His hands were shaking. His thumb rubbed back and forth over the phone screen. Elena, he said, and his voice cracked on my name, if I sign, our daughter. You can see her. Twice a month, scheduled in advance. Child support, $200 a month, deposited directly to her account. My voice was brisk, businesslike. If any of these terms don't work for you, we can negotiate. He lowered his head and said nothing. I got back in the car and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, he stood motionless in front of the building, like a plant that had been yanked out by the roots. I turned the corner, and he disappeared from the mirror. I let out a long breath. My palms were slick with sweat. The day Nathan signed the papers, it poured. I sat at a table by the window in a coffee shop downtown and watched him push through the door, shaking rain from a cheap folding umbrella. He spotted me, and his steps faltered, just a hitch, barely perceptible, before he forced himself forward. He was wearing the white button-down I'd bought him 3 years ago. It hung loose on his frame now. He'd lost more weight. His hair was clipped short, his father must have taken him to the barber. His jaw was clean-shaven, but the shadows under his eyes looked like bruises. He sat down across from me and pulled 2 sheets of paper from his briefcase. Slid them across the table. I signed, he said. I picked them up and read every line carefully. On the final page, his signature was a jagged, crooked scrawl. Beside it, a red thumbprint. Full custody to me. The house to me. The car to him. Savings split evenly based on audited bank records. Monthly child support of $200, paid on time. If it looks fine, sign. He pushed a pen toward me. I took it and signed my name beside his. Pressed my own thumbprint. 2 copies. 1 for each of us. It was simpler than I'd imagined. No screaming. No tears. No desperate grab for my hands or fevered apologies. No coffee thrown in his face. Just 2 pieces of paper, 2 signatures, 2 red prints. 5 years of marriage, finished. Elena. He said my name like a question. I folded my copy of the agreement into my bag and looked up. I'm sorry. The words came out of him deflated, hollow, like air leaking from a punctured tire. I know it's too late. But I really am. I regret everything. You don't need to apologize. Apologies don't fix anything. I stood up. What you owe me can't be repaid with sorry. His mouth opened. Closed. Nothing came out. The rain hammered against the window. The coffee shop speakers were playing some old song I couldn't name, a melody that felt familiar in the way of half-forgotten things. I've been thinking, he said finally. Trying to figure out when things went wrong between us. I couldn't pin it down. Things were good in the beginning. How did we get here? Because you never once thought you had to try to keep me. I picked up my coffee and drained the last cold sip. You assumed I'd always be there. No matter what you did, you thought if you just turned around, I'd be waiting. You were wrong. I set the mug down and stood. Nathan, remember this for the rest of your life. What you lost wasn't a wife who cooks and cleans and keeps her mouth shut. What you lost was Elena Shaw, a woman who once gave you everything she had. I opened my umbrella and walked into the rain. Through the window, I saw him still sitting there, motionless. A statue someone had forgotten to take down. My heart felt like a stone that had finally come to rest. Heavy, but still. News of the divorce traveled fast. The first person to lose her mind was my former mother-in-law. Her calls escalated from 3 times a day to every half hour. The script never changed. You can't do this to Nathan. That house belongs to our family. Our granddaughter is a Shaw, and if you keep her from us, I'm calling the police. The first few times, I tried to be patient. Margaret, Nathan signed the agreement voluntarily. I didn't force him. The down payment was $28,000 from your side. My dowry and my parents' contribution totaled $33,000, all of it went into that down payment. The renovation was paid for by my family. The mortgage during the marriage was paid from joint income. If you think the settlement is unfair, you're welcome to take it to court. But she always circled back to the same argument. It was marital property. When you divorce, you split it. We want our share. Fine. Let me break it down for you. I pulled out my phone calculator and walked her through it, line by line. Current market value, roughly $350,000. Your down payment, $28,000. My family's contribution to the down payment and renovation, over $40,000. 5 years of mortgage payments during the marriage, principal and interest, totaling about $56,000, the bulk of which came from my dowry, my salary, and my savings. Even if we sold the house and divided the proceeds, what your family could claim would be limited to the original $28,000 plus a proportional share of the appreciation. The remaining value, over $100,000, has nothing to do with Nathan. Silence. Additionally, I went on, the money Nathan spent on his affairs during the marriage constitutes dissipation of marital assets. Under the law, I can seek an unequal division in my favor based on that. If you want to fight this, I'm happy to open up every financial record from the past 5 years and let a judge sort it out. You, her voice was fraying. Elena, you are a cruel woman. You're trying to destroy this family. I'm not trying to destroy anyone. Your son destroyed himself. I hung up, blocked her number, and sat in the quiet of my kitchen, my hands wrapped around a cooling mug of tea. My former father-in-law called once. His tone was different. Elena. He sighed. You've been through a lot. Harold. I called you Dad for 5 years. This is probably the last time. He was quiet. Nathan was spoiled by his mother. His whole life, whatever he wanted, she moved heaven and earth to give him. I bear some responsibility for that. He paused. This outcome, he brought it on himself. No one else to blame. Elena, if you ever need anything for the child, you reach out to me. I don't care if I have to go against Nathan and his mother. That little girl is still my granddaughter. My throat tightened. Thank you. The first month after the divorce, I enrolled our daughter in daycare and started sending out resumes. A 5-year employment gap made my CV look skeletal. I'd studied accounting in college, worked 2 years as a bookkeeper, and then, marriage, pregnancy, full-time motherhood. 20-some applications. 3 callbacks. 2 of those ended the moment they saw the gap. The third was a struggling startup that offered $2,200 a month with no benefits. I took it. On my first day, my daughter cried so hard at daycare that she lost her voice. The teacher called me mid-morning, but I was in a meeting with my supervisor, going over receivables, and couldn't pick up. When I called back on my lunch break, the teacher said she'd cried herself to sleep. I sat on the stairwell, eating a boxed lunch I'd packed that morning. The rice was cold. The vegetables were greasy. I ate every bite. When I picked her up that evening, she saw me and her lower lip wobbled. But the tears didn't fall this time. She just reached out and wrapped her little arms around my neck. Elena did great today, the teacher said. She missed Mommy and she cried a bit, but she pulled herself together and even built a block tower with the other kids. I held her tight and kissed her cheek. Mommy has to go to work now, so I can't be with you all the time. You stay here and play with your teachers and friends, and when Mommy gets off work, I'll come get you. Okay. She blinked and repeated, in her small, precise voice, Mommy go work. Yes. Mommy come get me. Yes. She nodded and tucked her head into the hollow of my shoulder. I almost broke down right there at the daycare entrance. But I didn't. 3 months at the startup. Then I jumped to a slightly larger firm, better pay, a real benefits package. I opened an education savings account for my daughter and started depositing whatever I could spare. Sophie showed up constantly with supplies, formula, diapers, fruit, and whatever products her social media sponsorship sent her way. Face masks, snack boxes, small appliances. Anything useful, she brought to my doorstep. Stop doing this, I told her once. You have your own life. Don't pour everything into mine. Pour everything into yours. She looked genuinely offended. This is an investment. I'm the godmother. When my goddaughter grows up and gets rich, she's going to take care of me in my old age. It's called return on investment. She was trying to make me laugh. It worked, a little. She was the one person, besides my parents, who had really seen me through those years. Nathan started missing child support payments in the second month after the divorce. The first month, $200 arrived on time. The second month, it came 2 weeks late and was only half the amount. The third month, nothing. I didn't call. I didn't chase. Per the agreement, if he went more than 3 months in arrears, I could file for enforcement. But Margaret wasn't so patient. She ambushed me outside my office, her daughter in tow. They stood on either side of the lobby entrance like they'd choreographed it. I walked out with my daughter on my hip, heading for the bus stop, and there they were. Elena. Margaret lunged forward and grabbed my arm. Give us back the house. My daughter flinched and burrowed into me. I turned, shielding her. Let go of me. I will not. You're going to give me an answer today, or I'll make a scene right here in front of your whole office. Let's see how you like that. The security guard near the front desk noticed and started walking toward us. I took a deep breath. My voice was low and steady. Margaret. The settlement agreement is clear. If you disagree with it, take it to a judge. Don't come to my workplace. This is a public space. If you put your hands on me again, I'm calling the police. Call them. Go ahead. Let's see whose side they take. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Held the screen up for her to see, my thumb hovering over the call button. Let go of my arm, and I'll pretend this never happened. If you don't, I press call. The precinct is 10 minutes from here. We can go explain the whole situation to them together. Margaret stared at the glowing screen, her face cycling through shades of fury and calculation. Beside her, Jessica tugged at her sleeve. Mom, come on. Come on, nothing. Margaret shook her off, but her grip on my arm loosened. Elena, don't think I don't know what you did. You took advantage of my son while he was in the hospital. You forced him to sign. You think that's legal? We've hired a lawyer. The court will sort this out. Perfect. Then I'll see you in court. Bring all the evidence of Nathan's affairs. The chat logs. The transfers. The photos. We can show the judge everything and let him decide what's fair. Margaret's face went dark. I pulled my arm free and shifted my daughter to my other hip. I walked past them toward the bus stop. A dozen steps away, I could still hear Margaret's voice, sharp and venomous, spitting curses after me. My daughter pressed her face into my hair and didn't make a sound. It's okay, baby. Don't be scared. I rubbed her back. Mama's here. No one can hurt us. The bus came. I climbed aboard with her in my arms, found a seat by the window. As we pulled away, I looked back. Margaret and Jessica were gone. The lobby entrance stood empty. My hands were shaking. They shook from my fingertips to my wrists to my whole arm. It wouldn't stop. But I didn't cry. I filed for enforcement of child support at the end of the third month. The court processed it quickly, the facts were straightforward. The settlement agreement stipulated $200 per month. He'd missed the third payment entirely. Nathan showed up to the hearing. It was the first time I'd seen him since the divorce. He'd lost even more weight. His jacket was a size too big, hanging off his shoulders. His hair was uncombed, his face unshaven. He sat at the defendant's table and kept his head down the entire time. He never once looked at me. Margaret sat in the gallery, stone-faced. Harold was in the back corner. He caught my eye, nodded once, and looked away. The judge asked Nathan why he hadn't paid. "I haven't been working," Nathan mumbled. "No income." "Why aren't you working?" "Health issues. Still recovering." My lawyer stood. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit evidence that the defendant owned a vehicle, a sedan, which was awarded to him in the divorce settlement 3 months ago. The vehicle was valued at approximately $11,000. During the period in which the defendant was in arrears on child support, he sold this vehicle for over $10,000. I would ask the defendant, where did that money go?" Nathan's face went pale. I paid off debts." "What debts?" the judge asked. Nathan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. My lawyer continued. "Your Honor, I'd also like to note that the defendant earned close to $90,000 annually prior to the divorce, and that during the marriage, he transferred over $80,000 in marital funds to extramarital partners. This clearly establishes that the defendant has stable earning capacity and is fully capable of making $200 monthly child support payments. His claims of having no income and health issues are simply pretexts to evade his legal obligations." The judge looked at Nathan. "Mr. Shaw, do you have anything to say?" Nathan's mouth worked soundlessly. Then he looked at me, a look that held pleading and shame and something else I couldn't quite read. I looked away. The judge ruled from the bench. Nathan had 15 days to pay the arrears in full. Child support was to be paid on time going forward. Any further delinquency would result in immediate enforcement action, including wage garnishment. After the hearing, Margaret came at me, finger jabbing the air, spit flying. "Elena, you will pay for this. A woman as vicious as you'll get what's coming to you." I stopped. Turned. Looked her in the eye. "You can curse me all you want, Margaret. But the more you curse me, the worse it gets for your son." My voice was very quiet, quiet enough that only she could hear. Have you ever wondered why Nathan's surgical wound wouldn't heal? Why he hemorrhaged so badly during his recovery? Margaret's eyes went wide. "I didn't hurt him. I just switched his antibiotics for vitamins. His medicated ointment for Vaseline." I smiled, very slightly. He was the one who couldn't control himself. He was the one who chose to get into bed with another woman while his body was still raw. Is that my fault? Margaret clutched her chest. Her mouth trembled open. No sound came out. "You once said I was a cruel woman. You were right." I stepped back. "Your son destroyed 5 years of my life. I only destroyed him once. By my math, I'm still in the red." I turned and walked to my car. In the rearview mirror, she stood frozen, trembling. I felt no satisfaction. No guilt either. Just the quiet click of a ledger finally balanced. On my daughter's 3rd birthday, I ordered a small cake and stuck 3 candles in the frosting. Sophie came over with a plush rabbit nearly as tall as my daughter, who shrieked with joy and ran circles around the living room, clutching it. My parents video called from across the country, singing "Happy Birthday" through a screen. My mother wiped at her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. When it was time to blow out the candles, my daughter clasped her hands together, squeezed her eyes shut, and made a wish with the solemn intensity only a 3-year-old can muster. "What did you wish for?" she said, in her small, clear voice. "I wished for Mommy to be happy forever." Sophie's eyes went red. I scooped my daughter into my arms and kissed her cheek, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that nothing in the world mattered more than this tiny person. After dinner, while my daughter watched cartoons, Sophie helped me clear the table. "How's Nathan?" she asked quietly. "Child support is coming in on time now. $200 a month. He called once, wanting to see her. I told him twice a month, scheduled in advance, per the agreement. He's seen her exactly twice in a year. After I asked him to follow the schedule, he stopped calling." And the mother-in-law. I heard Nathan never fully recovered. Some lasting complications from the surgery. He's got issues with incontinence. Margaret takes him to specialist after specialist, chasing down home remedies. I paused. I saw her once, on my commute. She was handing out flyers at a subway entrance. Her hair had gone half gray. Her back was bent. She looked nothing like the woman who used to stand in my kitchen and tell me how to raise my child. Sophie was silent for a moment. Sounds like karma to me. Maybe. Maybe not. Nathan hadn't just wrecked 5 years of my life. He'd wrecked his own body, his mother's dreams. He was their only son, the one who was supposed to carry on the family name, give them grandchildren, make them proud. Instead, he turned himself into a husk. Harold sent word through a mutual acquaintance once. Nathan was working at some small firm, doing administrative busy work. For $500 a week. Between his health problems and his diminished circumstances, life was thin. He'd sold the Camry and bought a used scooter. Crashed it in the rain one night. Broken leg. Another hospital stay. I listened to all of it without much feeling. It was like hearing about an old colleague I'd never been particularly close to. The man who'd once made me cry until dawn, who'd made me ache with rage, who'd made me ask myself 1,000 times why me, that man had faded into a memory. A faded photograph. A name I used to know. 2 years after the divorce, I passed my CPA exam. The day I got the results, I made a decision. I quit my job and started my own firm. I rented a tiny office downtown, barely more than a closet, and opened an independent bookkeeping and tax practice. My first 2 clients were my former boss and a friend of Sophie's. I did everything myself: business registrations, tax filings, receivables, payables, collections. I worked late into the night, and on those nights, Sophie or the neighbor watched my daughter. Sometimes she came with me to the office and fell asleep on the little sofa under a fleece blanket. I'd look over at her while I was reconciling accounts. Her cheeks were flushed with sleep. Her eyelashes were long against her skin. Her face was starting to look more and more like mine. Year 1, break even. Year 2, a dozen clients. Year 3, I hired 2 employees and moved into a real office with big windows and good light. Year 4, my daughter started elementary school. On the first day, I dressed her in her new uniform, tied her hair into 2 neat pigtails, and watched her hoist her little backpack onto her shoulders. At the school gate, she turned around and looked up at me. "Mommy, are you happy today?" I bent down and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Mommy is happy every day." She grinned, showing a gap where her front teeth had fallen out. Then she waved and bounced through the gate, her pigtails swinging. I stood there watching her small back until she rounded the corner into the school building and disappeared. My phone buzzed. "Sophie. Dinner tonight to celebrate my goddaughter's first day of school. I already made a reservation. Picking you up after work. Please tell me it's not hot pot again. Last time my stomach was wrecked for 3 days. This one's different. Bone broth base. Very gentle. Picked it especially for you, old lady." I'm 3 years younger than you. Yeah, but you look older. All that stress. 6 o'clock. Don't be late. I hung up and stood at the school gate, looking up at the September sky. It was high and blue, the clouds bleached white as fresh laundry. The year I got divorced, I thought my life was over. I'd stood in that hospital corridor holding my 1-year-old daughter, believing I was the most pitiful, tragic person in the world. It took me years to understand, leaving that man wasn't the end of my life. It was the beginning. I heard about Vanessa again when my daughter was in 2nd grade. Sophie told me she'd gotten married. To a divorced man 15 years older, with 2 kids from his first marriage. She'd become a stepmother the day she said, "I do." By the 2nd year, the man was complaining that she spent money like water. They fought constantly. The police were called to their apartment more than once. The man told his ex-wife that Vanessa was useless for anything except her face. Honestly, what did she expect? Sophie was chewing on her straw, mangling it between her teeth. Did she ever try to contact Nathan again? Are you kidding? After what happened to him, she changed her number so fast. Cut him off completely. She was terrified of catching any more shrapnel. Sophie snorted. Women like that, they're strategic. When there's something to extract, they stick like burrs. The second the man's no longer useful, they're gone. I stirred my coffee. Somewhere out there, Vanessa was probably still taking selfies, still filtering her life into something that looked glamorous. But the Cancun infinity pool and the candlelit dinners and the Chanel bags, those were a long time ago now. That was her life. Her choices. Nothing to do with me. As for the woman who'd called the ambulance for Nathan that night, I never learned her name. The nurse told me she'd vanished from the hospital before the sun came up. Later, her contact disappeared from Nathan's phone. Who deleted it, I couldn't say. Everyone walks their own road. Where they end up is no one's fault but their own. Another autumn. My daughter was in 3rd grade. Good enough at math, didn't love it. But her writing was extraordinary. Her teacher said she had an imagination that felt older than her years, a sensitivity to language that couldn't be taught. Occasionally, she asked about her father. She was 7, maybe 8, when she came home from school one day and set her backpack down with unusual care. "Mommy, everyone in my class has a dad. Where's my dad?" I knelt down and looked into her eyes. "Your dad made some bad choices. That's why we don't live together anymore. But he's still your father. If you ever want to see him, I can help arrange that." She tilted her head, thinking. Then she shook it. "Never mind," she said. "He wasn't nice to you. I don't like him." I held her for a long time, unable to speak. She'd seen him once. We'd run into him at the mall, in the parking garage elevator. He'd had a woman on his arm, someone I didn't recognize. When he saw us, his face flickered. He started to lift his hand, opened his mouth, and then closed it and said nothing. My daughter had stared at him for a few seconds. Then she turned her face into my waist and stayed that way until the doors opened and he walked out. The woman with him glanced back, her gaze catching on me for a moment before she hurried after him. My daughter hadn't said a word the whole way home. That night, as I was tucking her in, she asked, "That man. Was that my dad?" "Yes." "Oh." She rolled onto her side, facing away from me. Then, muffled, "He didn't look anything like his pictures." I didn't know what to say. A moment later, she rolled back, threw her arms around my neck, and kissed my cheek. "Mommy, I have you. That's enough." After she fell asleep, I sat by her bed for a long time. Her eyes were mine. The bridge of her nose was his. She carried half his blood, but she would never be anything like him. I would raise her to be kind, and brave, and to know her own worth. A person nothing like her father. I didn't expect to see Nathan again. My daughter was 10, and I'd taken on a new client, a small logistics company that needed their books cleaned up. Their office was in a shabby building out in the suburbs, the kind of place where the elevator lights flickered and the hallway wallpaper peeled in long, damp strips. I found the suite number, knocked, and the receptionist led me to a conference room. Walking down the corridor, I passed a row of cubicles. In the very last one, in the corner, a man sat with his back to the hallway, hunched over a spreadsheet. His shoulders were narrow. His hair was thinning. I could see the pale gleam of scalp through the strands. I didn't slow down. I signed the contract. The client walked me out. Passing that corner cubicle again, the man turned around to refill his mug from a stained thermos. He saw me. It was Nathan. He'd aged more than I could have imagined. A decade, at least. The lines around his eyes were deep grooves. His cheekbones jutted sharply from a face that had lost all its fullness. His skin was gray. His thermos was dented and missing its lid, and when he saw me, his hand jerked, and he nearly dropped it. I looked at him. I didn't stop walking. "Elena." His voice, behind me. Soft. Almost a whisper. I didn't turn around. Outside, the sun was blinding. I stood at the curb waiting for my car and inhaled deeply. Something moved through my chest, not anger. That was long gone. It was something closer to pity. Or maybe just the strange, hollow echo of a life I'd once lived. 5 years. That was all it had taken to reduce him to this. He'd been so full of himself once, the crisp white shirts, the polished Camry, the vacation photos on social media, the champagne toasts at company parties, my amazing wife at home. He'd probably thought his life would always be that. Effortless. Charmed. But life doesn't work that way. What you owe, you repay. What you take, you return. What you squander, eventually, you go without. My car arrived. I got in. The shabby office building shrank in the side mirror and then vanished as we turned the corner. I knew, with a quiet certainty, that it was the last time I'd ever see him. My daughter graduated from elementary school at 12. At the ceremony, she stood at the podium, class representative, and read a poem she'd written. It was short, but one line burned itself into my memory. Asterisk, my mother is a tree. She stands in the wind, she stands in the rain. She has never fallen, asterisk. I sat in the audience, tears spilling down my face before I even knew I was crying. That night, I pulled out her baby albums and turned the pages slowly. Her wrinkled newborn face. Her first time rolling over. Crawling, then walking, then standing at the door with her backpack, ready for her first day of school. At the very back of the album, a photo of the two of us at the park when she was 2. In the picture, I'm much thinner than I am now. I'm wearing a faded cotton dress, my hair pulled back in a careless ponytail. My eyes are sunken, my cheekbones too sharp. I'd only been divorced a few months then. I was working around the clock and running on fumes. But in that photo, I'm beaming. Because she's in my arms. Mom. My daughter had come out of her room without me noticing. She stood behind me, rubbing her eyes. What are you looking at? Old photos. From when I was young. She leaned over my shoulder and studied the picture. Then she poked at my face in the photo. You're prettier now. Really? Really? She wrapped her arms around my neck and rested her chin on my shoulder. You're pretty every day now. Because I make you happy every day. I turned and pulled her into my arms. This girl, this person who had been with me through the worst of it, a tiny heartbeat inside my body while my world fell apart, she was now a young woman. She was the best decision I'd ever made. Time moves fast when you're not counting the days. My daughter shot up past my shoulder, started middle school, started caring about clothes, started talking at dinner about which boy had a crush on which girl. One evening, halfway through her stir-fry, she looked up and asked, "Mom, do you ever regret marrying him?" She rarely said Nathan's name anymore. She didn't even call him my dad. Just him. I thought about it. No, I said. I don't. She looked surprised. Why not? After everything he did. Because without him, there'd be no you. I dropped a piece of braised pork into her bowl. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. Whatever I paid for that, it was worth it. She stared at her bowl for a long time. Then she looked up, eyes bright. Mom. I'm going to be so good to you. Better than anyone. I know, I said, smiling. You've always been good to me. She insisted on doing the dishes that night. I leaned against the kitchen doorframe and watched her at the sink, scrubbing, rinsing, humming off key. All the exhaustion, all the fear, all the lonely nights of the past decade, in that moment, it all felt like a fair price for this. Sophie got married the year my daughter started high school. The guy was a software engineer, steady, kind, had been chasing Sophie for 3 years. Dumb as a brick, Sophie said, but his heart's solid. I control the money. He does the cooking. I was her maid of honor. Standing at the altar, watching Sophie in her wedding dress, she was so beautiful it hurt. She'd been by my side since we were teenagers. She'd yelled at me through every breakup, held me through my divorce, poured her own money and time into my business, been a second mother to my child. She was, aside from my daughter, the most important person in my life. At the reception, she grabbed my hand. She'd had a few glasses of champagne and her words were slipping into each other. Elena, you know what the happiest day of my life was? What? The day you left that bastard. Her eyes were red, and her breath was sweet with alcohol. That day, I got drunk by myself at home. Half a bottle of wine. You have no idea, those years you were with him, how much it hurt me to watch. I hugged her. I know, I said, rubbing her back the way I used to rub my daughter's when she was small. I always knew. You have to be happy now, she whispered. You have to be happy. You've earned it. I promise. My daughter got into an out-of-state university the year I turned 45. The school was over 1,000 miles away. I flew with her, helped her make her dorm bed, hung her mosquito net, walked her through the campus, dining hall, library, lecture halls, track, all of it. In the evening, it was time for me to leave. She walked me to the campus gate. Mom, she said, standing in the September breeze, her hair blowing across her face, take care of yourself. You too. Eat on time. I know. Don't work so much. Your eyes are bad. I know. She looked at me. Her lips pressed together. Then she stepped forward and wrapped me in a fierce hug. Mom, thank you. Her voice was thick. Thank you for choosing to have me. Thank you for not giving up on me because of him. Thank you for raising me alone. I lifted my hand and stroked her hair. You don't have to thank me. You saved me. If it weren't for you, I might not have made it through that first year. She held me tighter. Okay, that's enough. Your classmates are going to think your mom did something terrible to you. I gently pushed her back and wiped the tears off her cheeks. Go on. I'm leaving. I walked away. After a few steps, I turned around. She was still standing there, waving, tears on her face and a beautiful smile. I got in the rental car and started the engine. As the campus shrank in the rearview mirror, I knew she would be fine. She would have her own life, her own work, her own love, her own battles. And me, I was no longer the young mother who'd stood trembling in a hospital corridor at 3 a.m. My name is Elena Shaw. I'm 45 years old. I own a small but thriving business. I have genuine friends. I have a remarkable daughter. I've been divorced, I've been broken, I've been beaten, and life has slapped me across the face more times than I can count. But I didn't fall. I pulled out every rotten, broken, poisonous thing from my life, one piece at a time, and I planted something new in the empty spaces. The radio was playing some old song. I didn't know the title, but the melody felt familiar. Outside, the early autumn dusk was bleeding gold and crimson across the horizon, the sky on fire with the last light of the day. I found myself thinking about that other night, all those years ago. Coming out of the hospital. Sitting in my car. Staring up at the red emergency light. Crying so hard I thought I might dissolve. Believing, with every cell in my body, that my life was over. I didn't know then that the red light wasn't the end of the road. It was a door. And past that door, there was a different road altogether. It took me more than a decade to walk it. The car slowed at a red light. The setting sun fell through the windshield and pooled warm across my hands on the steering wheel. I looked down at them. They were steady. The light turned green. I pressed the accelerator, and the car rolled smoothly through the intersection, into the blaze of gold.